Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Friday marks Labor Day here in South Korea, but the mood surrounding the labor market is far from upbeat. In the first quarter, the number of unemployed surpassed 1 million for the first time in 5 years, with young people accounting for 1 in 4 job seekers, highlighting the growing strain on youth unemployment. At the same time, the structure of hiring is shifting. With the rise of AI and a stronger preference for experienced workers, entry-level opportunities are shrinking, while companies are increasingly rehiring retirees on contract terms, reshaping the generational balance in the workforce. Concerns are also mounting over gaps in labor protections, particularly for non-regular and platform workers, alongside renewed debate over wage systems and working conditions. And with discussions over next year's minimum wage now underway, questions are growing over where the labor market is headed next. For more on this, we connect to Oh Taek, a director of the Industrial Relations at Research Division at Korea Labor Institute. A very big welcome.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
And also joining us is Kim Mok-yeon, Associate Professor of Economics at Yonsei University. Welcome, Professor.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Let's start a discussion first with the director. So like I've said, Friday is Labor Day in Korea. When you look at the bigger labor market right now, what stands out as the most pressing concern for you?
First of all, there is a deepening mismatch between jobs and workers. The firms, especially in manufacturing, care services, and small and medium-sized enterprises, continue to report labor shortage. Why? Many young people struggle to find good jobs. This reflects skill mismatch, which means that there is a difference between what workers are trained for and what firms need, and strong preference for large firm and public sector jobs, and the regional imbalance, which means that the job location is different from where people wanted to live. There is also rapid aging and shrinking workforce problem. The working age problem, population is declining in Korea now, and labor force participation among older workers is rising, but often in low quality and low productive jobs. The fiscal pressure increases as the dependence ratio worsens. The challenge is not just the fewer workers, but how to maintain productivity with an older workforce. There is also concern for youth employment. Even though headline youth unemployment is not extremely high, but there is a warning sign like a delayed labor market entry, underemployment, and spec building period, and rising need concern in certain groups. This can have long-term effects on earnings and fertility decision of these groups.
Right, so it's a very important issue since it's really connected to productivity. Now, when we get deeper into the figures, one of the headline number, it stands out, the number of unemployed people surpassed 1 million in the first quarter in the first quarter for the first time in 5 years. Professor Shim, how should we interpret this figure?
Yes, it is really a notable figure. At the first glance, it may suggest that labor market conditions have weakened, particularly in sectors that are more sensitive to the business cycle. But to me, it is important to interpret this figure with some caution, because the number of unemployed can increase for more than one reason. In fact, if we look at the broader labor market indicators, the picture is a little bit mixed. The employment rate has been trending upward in recent months, suggesting that overall job creation has remained relatively solid. Also, at the same time, if we look at the unemployment rate, it has remained fairly stable at around 3%. This indicates that the labor market is softening, but not deteriorating sharply. So part of the increase in the numbers of unemployed may reflect the fact that more people actively entering the labor market and looking for jobs rather than a large-scale job loss. Also, while the employment levels are relatively strong, as I just pointed out, the quality of jobs remains a concern. For example, roughly 40% of wage workers in Korea are still in non-regular positions. But if we look at this number more deeply, what you can see is that this trend has been stable over several years, which indicate that the labor market has not that weakened that much than we imagine.
But when we look into the more specifics regarding the latest data, the unemployment of young people, it's especially very worrying, making up more than a quarter of all unemployed. Director Oh, why are young job seekers being hit particularly hard?
A large share of young job seekers are not simply looking for any job. They are targeting large conglomerate, public sector jobs, and highly stable professional roles. Because these positions are limited, many graduates delay accepting any jobs and remain officially unemployed. This creates problems such as longer preparation period, repeated application cycles, and voluntary unemployment while waiting for prepared jobs. So part of the youth unemployment reflects selective job search, not just lack of opportunities. Nowadays, firms, especially large firms, have more caution about hiring. They prefer experienced workers who are job-ready hires, reduce entry-level recruitment, and use more internship contract roles or outsourcing instead of permanent hires. For young people, this creates a classic trap, like you need experience to get a job, but you need a job to get experience. Nowadays, technological development such as artificial intelligence make this situation worse, since AI can provide some work which is provided by younger workers in the past.
Right, exactly. As our director has just pointed out, there are growing concerns that AI and the changing hiring practices are really reducing entry-level opportunities. Professor, how much is this contributing to the youth employment slowdown right now?
Yes, as Director Oza's pointed out, the new technologies like the AI and changes in the hiring practices due to technology development seem to really matter for the labor market, especially for the young workers. For example, a recent Bank of Korea analysis found that around more than 200,000 youth jobs have disappeared over the past few years, with most of the decline concentrated in industries that are highly exposed to AI, such as IT and information services. What is important here is the underlying mechanism. The impact of AI is not mainly coming from layoffs, but from reduced hiring. Firms are keeping the existing workers, but they are cutting back on entry-level recruitment as we see these days, because AI can now handle many of the routine tasks that used to be assigned to the new hires. So as a result, the burdens for disproportionately on young people who are trying to enter the labor market for the first time. We can actually already see this in the data. Youth employment has been declining for several years, and in several sectors like the IT and professional services that pay higher wages, employment among young workers has dropped quite sharply. Also, at the same time, companies are increasingly favoring experienced workers who can contribute immediately, which further reduced opportunities for the young workers.
Right. And another issue that is a very big concern in South Korea is the aging society. South Korea is entering one, of course, and more companies are rehiring retired workers on lower paid contract terms instead of basically extending their retirement age. Professor Shim, do you think this could be a practical solution? And what do you think, what more could be done about this?
Yeah, I think the rehiring the retired workers on the contract term is, to some extent, a practical and realistic response to very rapid population aging. From the firm's perspective, it allows them to retain experienced workers, as I just pointed out, while managing labor costs especially in the system that we face in the Korean economy, where wages tend to increase with seniority. So in the short run, this approach can help maintain employment among older workers without placing too much financial burdens on firms. But we also need to notice that this is more like a partial solution than a fundamental one. The main issue is that these reemployment rearrangements are often associated with significantly lower wages and less stable working conditions. So while they do keep older workers in the labor market, they may also lead to a decline in job quality and income security. So in that sense, simply expanding reemployment on contract terms may not be sufficient as a long-term strategy by the government. What is needed to me is a more comprehensive approach. This could include gradually aligning wages more productivity rather than seniority, encouraging more flexible career paths, and investing in retaining so that older workers can remain productive in changing industries.
Those would be helpful ideas moving forward. Now let's shift to the labor conditions, Director Oh. Even though Labor Day is now a legal holiday beginning this year, less than half of non-regular workers actually receive a paid leave. What does this gap tell us about inequality in Korea's labor market and broader working conditions?
There is a big difference between formal rights and the real access. The Labor Day is a legally recognized paid holiday. In theory, that right should apply broadly. But the fact that fewer than half of the non-regular workers received paid leaves shows that the legal protections are unevenly enforced, and access to the right depends heavily on employment status. Usually, non-regular workers bear institutional vulnerability. Non-regular workers, such as temporary, part-time, and subcontracted, are less likely to receive paid leave because they typically have shorter contract or unstable hours, weaker bargaining power, less coverage by internal HR systems or unions. This means that not all workers are equally visible or protected within the system. The dualism of the Korean labor market extends beyond wage into working conditions. Korea's labor market dualism also affects paid leave, working hours, social insurance coverage, job security, not just wage level. So the divide is really about the quality of employment as a whole.
Right, so it really depends on the status of the employment. And on that note, the government recently had introduced guidelines to prevent the abuse of a comprehensive wage system. So, Director, what exactly is this system and why has it become such a big issue right now?
Under normal labor law in Korea, employers must pay extra wages for overtime, night work, and holiday work. Under the comprehensive wage system, instead of calculating overtime separately, employers bundle a fixed amount of overtime pay into the base salary. Then, why firms use it? Usually, the system had a practical rationale. It was used in jobs where working hours are hard to measure, like sales, R&D, and fieldwork, and schedules are irregular. In those cases, calculating overtime hour by hour is genuinely difficult. So, a preset inclusive wage made administrative sense. However, in many workplaces today, working hours are measurable but not recorded properly. The include overtime is vague or not specified. Workers often work more hours than what already built into pay. So the system can function as the factor cap on overtime pay regardless of how much people actually work. So main concerns are growing on excessive working hours, disproportionate effect on vulnerable workers, legal ambiguity, and inconsistent enforcement, rising awareness of hidden unpaid labor, shift toward transparency and accountability, and so on.
Right. So the key principle is that workers must be paid additional wages if actual overtime exceeds what was pre-agreed. So, Professor Shim, if in reality, how effective can this be without proper tracking of working hours?
Well, I think the principle itself is quite clear and appropriate. If workers put in more hours than what was pre-agreed, then they should be compensated accordingly. That is a basic element of fair labor market standards. However, the key issue here is whether working hours are actually tracked in practice. Without proper monitoring, it becomes very difficult to enforce this rule effectively. And in Korea, this issue is particularly relevant because of the widespread use of what is known as a comprehensive wage system, as is pointed out by the Director O. In such cases, actual working hours are not always strictly recorded, which means that even if employees work longer hours, it can be difficult to verify, and that even and compensation can be not sustainable. So there is a clear gap between the formal rule, which requires additional pay for the extra work, and the reality of workplace practices. So to make this system more effective, it is important to strengthen both tracking and enforcement. For example, more transparent standardized method of recording working hours, possibly using digital tools, could help reduce ambiguity. And at the same time, firms also need some degree of flexibility, especially in industries where workloads fluctuate over time. So the challenge is really to strike a balance between the kind of the flexibility and accountability.
Definitely. So without proper tracking, enforcement really remains a key challenge. Now, another big issue right now is the minimum wage, Professor Shim. How do you assess the current level, and what kind of direction should next year's decision take?
I think the minimum wage needs to be assessed in the context of current labor market conditions, especially youth employment. On the one hand, it's important to protect low-income workers like the young workers, particularly when living costs remain elevated like what you see these days. But at the same time, we also need to consider how it affects hiring decisions of the firms. When labor costs rise, firms like the small businesses tend to become more cautious in hiring new workers, as we discussed, and entry-level hiring is often the first to be reduced. So in that sense, if minimum wage increases are too rapid, as we saw several years ago, some of the burdens could be shifted toward young job seekers who are already facing a more difficult labor market due to slower economic growth and changing hiring practice due to the development of new technologies like the AI, which I discussed earlier. And there are some evidence that minimum wage can really affect the hiring decisions, especially distorting the firm's incentive to hire young workers. So in sum, I think the direction for the next year for the minimum wage should be kind of the gradual and carefully calibrated, rather than very large increases. Adjusting the minimum wages in line with the productivity that we have in Korea and overall economic conditions would help to strike a better balance between work protection and employment opportunities.
So, right, it's a very complex issue, and we have really to be cautious about that. But finally, rising unemployment, we're seeing structural shifts and gaps in labor protections. Director O, what should be the top policy priority moving forward?
First of all, make protections universal and enforceable. We need not just the formal rights, but the real ones. For example, workers' rights such as paid leave, overtime pay, and social insurance coverage should follow the worker, not depends on contract type. Second, we need to reduce the gap between regular and non-regular employment. Firms rely on non-regular workers because regular employment is relatively rigid and costly, and non-regular employment is flexible and cheaper. Policy needs to compress this gap from both sides by slightly increasing flexibility in regular employment and slightly improving protections for non-regular workers. Third, we need to upgrade the job quality in small and medium-sized enterprises. Most jobs are not in large companies. The gap in wage, stability, and working condition is large between large firms and small and medium-sized companies. Policies should include productivity support, such as technology and management innovation, wage subsidy tied to the job quality, and sectoral approaches. Lastly, increase transparency in working conditions. For this purpose, we need clear recording of working hours, transparent pay structure, and workers' access to information.
Right, very thoughtful ideas. So it really seems deeper structural issues in Korea's labor market still needs to be addressed moving forward. We'll definitely be looking forward to those moves. But as for now, we'll have to wrap our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights, Director Oh.
Thank you.
And of course, Professor Shim, we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.